This is Pet Life Radio. Let's talk pets.
The Dr. Courtney Show is brought to you by Heroes for Healthy Pets. We're passionate about your pet's health.
Yes, good day from California and welcome to the Dr. Courtney podcast. As you could probably guess, my name is Dr. Courtney. I'm a veterinarian and co-host of Pet Talk on Nat Geo Wild and just all-around pet lover. I want to send a big thank you for all of you who are regular listeners, and for those who are just tuning in for the very first time, I want to send you a big welcome. This is a podcast where you get to laugh, love, and learn a lot about pets. And I want to tell you up front, without any hesitation, we have a huge guest today. I mean big. And I don't mean obviously big in terms of size. We're not going to be talking like Shrek or Sasquatch. I mean, we're talking big in terms of philanthropy and humanitarianism. A real giant in terms of generosity and altruism. And it's just an all-around outstanding global citizen. That's who we're going to be talking today, and I'm super pumped about it. I honestly can't wait. If you're the type of person that likes to be inspired, if you're the type of person that likes to hear from someone that gives you the impetus to go out and change the world, then this is the interview you're going to want to hear. And so it's going to be honestly incredible. So let's just jump right into it. Rabies. What's the first image that comes to your mind when you hear that word? Take a second to contemplate what it means to you when you hear the name of that virus or that disease. What's the first animal that comes to mind? And when you think of that animal, what exactly are you picturing? Maybe in your mind you're imagining a dog that's hostile, growling, ready for the attack, the excessive saliva, the drooling, maybe even foaming at the mouth, that take no prisoners type of aggression. Well, that image that I'm painting, which really doesn't tell the entire story, is all too familiar. That image has been depicted in over 14 movies, of which one of the most famous movies was Cujo. I remember seeing this movie. This is a modestly successful movie produced in 1983. It grossed around $21 million, and it put itself on the same movie echelon as Jaws and The Twilight Zone. So it was fairly popular. And if you ever get a chance to look at the box cover of this movie, it's actually pretty unsettling. In fact, descriptions of the rabies virus and the rabies disease are over thousands of years old. And if there's one infectious disease that people fear the most and never want to be stricken with, it has to be rabies. Veterinarians as a whole have up to 300 times greater risk of coming into contact with rabies. But let's be honest, most people don't think about dying of rabies. Sure, if you query someone on infectious disease, the subject of rabies may come up in a conversation. But in general, when most people wake up, their main stress is whether they're going to make it to work in time. They don't worry about contracting rabies. But that's not the case in so many other parts of the world. India is just one of the many countries where the threat of rabies can be earth-shatteringly vivid and all too real. Let's be clear, rabies is a brutal virus, a ruthless disease. Watching the disease ravage the body of an animal is soul-crushing. The symptoms of aggression that people see in these animals can paint a wrong picture. I mean, these aren't horrible creatures. Remember, they are victims of this disease. And honestly, a lot of people don't even realize how fast death occurs from rabies. The course of the disease in the body is actually pretty fascinating from a biology standpoint. But for the sake of today, let's just focus on the Cliff Notes version of it. And the short version is essentially this. The virus is in the saliva during a bite. And after an animal is bitten or humans bitten, the virus travels to muscles and nerves and begins that fateful march to the brain. The journey to the brain can happen quickly or slowly. And in dogs, the typical incubation period, the time when the virus is traveling, is usually between 21 to 80 days. Once in the brain, it gets to the saliva, and now the virus can be spread to other dogs. A lot of people are very familiar with just probably only one phase of rabies, but there's actually 3 phases. The first phase is the prodromal phase, where it's the lead up. It's the lead up to the disease, and it's subtle, so you may not notice it. This is where there's a change in the animal's personality. Friendly animals may become shy, and the voice box of the larynx may begin to spasm a little bit. And there may even be a voice change. The second phase, or the most common phase, is the excitative phase. This is the one that we've become all too familiar with the help of movies and television, unfortunately. This is that classic mad dog stage where these animals seem to have no fear. They may even suffer from hallucinations. And if they're confined, they may try to bite the bars of the cage. And 80% of dogs who have the disease may display this sort of furious form where they're just really aggressive and they wander aimlessly into new areas. The third phase is unfortunately where a lot of humans can get infected because it's called the paralytic or dumb phase. This is where animals may seem lethargic or kind of out of their mind and paralyzed, and they seem to be weak. So there is that prodromal phase, excitative phase, and then the paralytic or dumb phase. And once it reaches this phase, this last phase, there is no treatment for humans or animals. So listen, rabies sounds like and is a very horrible disease. So if there's a certain point where there is no treatment available, the focus comes down to prevention. Prevention is always better than cure. How do we prevent rabies? How do we eliminate this horrible scourge from killing children and adults all over the world? Well, first, vaccinate. Second, you limit exposure to wildlife. And third, you listen to our next guests. As we mentioned, he's a remarkable person that has spearheaded the incredible efforts of Mission Rabies all across the globe. But before we get to our exciting guests, I want to be sure to let everyone out there know how to get in contact with me. If you have any questions, thoughts, or topic discussions, you can reach me at Dr. Courtney DVM on Twitter or Instagram. Questions with positivity and love will get answered with priority, but not exclusivity. So right now, let's pause for a few brief moments, and then we'll reconnect on the flip side to introduce you to our incredible guest, and we'll talk all about Mission Rabies.
Sit. Stay. We'll be right back after a short pause. Well, 4 to be exact.
It's not just a sneeze. It could be the pathway to disease. Your dog is at risk for contracting dog flu. That's why it's important to vaccinate your dog for dog flu. Get your dog vaccinated today. Visit dogflu.com for more information.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
We are back, and I'm super excited to speak with our next guest. I'm excited because we have an incredible opportunity in front of us today. Today, we are going to speak with the Global Operations Manager of Mission Rabies. He's a veterinarian, and in a term, this man is globally minded. He has a sincere care and solicitude for people and animals all throughout the world. His entire career and life has had foundations in helping people all over the world. In addition to graduating from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine in Munich, Germany in 2013, he's also past president of the International Veterinary Students Association. He is diligently working on establishing and maintaining very key partnerships for Mission Rabies with international organizations and partners. No charity runs without people working hard in the trenches on the day-to-day operations, and he is one of those people who is working hard in the trenches. He's incredibly organized and is in charge of the project management. He will be working on improving disease surveillance at certain project sites, and with the start of 2017, he will be beginning his PhD. His name is Fred Lohr, the Global Operations Director for Mission Rabies, and he's been a dedicated member of the Mission Rabies team since 2014. Podcast listeners, please join me in welcoming Fred Lohr to the show. Welcome, Frederick.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. This is really, really exciting.
I'm naturally differential, so I want to call you Mr. Lohr, Dr. Lohr, but can I call you Fred?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, perfect. Excellent. So excited to speak with you because on this show, we talk so much about the human-animal bond. That's what we're all about here. Listen, we talk about heavy scientific issues like canine influenza, but then we even touch on like wildly fun topics like dog fashion shows and stuff like that. So the main thread in all the subjects that we talk about is that relationship between pets and humans. Your work, in my opinion, really hits at the heart of that human-animal bond in a very crystal clear way, in a sort of a life-saving way. Do you see it like that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you said in your introduction, rabies has been around for ages. It's one of the most documented and also oldest known diseases to mankind. And as such, of course, it has influenced the bonds between people and dogs, especially over time. So we have those tools to get rid of this disease for over 100 years now, since 1885. So there's literally no reason why this fearful disease should still be around. And this is what we're all about. We want to bring that trust in the dogs back, especially in those areas where we still have rabies.
That's an excellent point. You know, when I think about the human-animal bond, I'll be honest, I would love everyone to love pets just as much as I do, love animals just as much as I do. But the reality is not everyone does. And I totally understand that. But what I really impress to people is that the human-animal bond reaches almost everybody. Whether you like pets or don't like pets, that human-animal bond, our interaction, our relationship with animals affects everyone, whether or not you realize it. And so that's why I think what your work is so important to talk about, because if you're a pet lover, an animal lover, then your work is very salient and important. And even if you don't feel like animals affect you, your work shows that they do. Listen, we're jumping right into the deep end already, talking about amazing topics. But before we really get into it, we have to do a portion of the show called Set the Scene. And Set the Scene is basically setting the scene for all the viewers out there where you basically developed your love for pets, where you basically developed a relationship with animals. Maybe you didn't have a pet growing up. Maybe you established it later in life. But do us a favor and set the scene for when young Fred was growing up, where you grew up, and what your first contact was with animals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up in a rural part of Germany, just close to the French border. And basically where my parents lived, we lived next to a farm. So I was always surrounded by animals. Animals were always part of my life. Now, since I was about 5 years old, I knew I wanted to do something with medicine. So over the course of time, that naturally came together. My love for animals growing up, we had pet rabbits, we had guinea pigs, we still have cats, now I have a dog. So that love of animals combined with my keen interest in medicine led to the decision to start studying veterinary medicine in Munich.
Wow. What's your dog's name?
My dog's name is Megan. She's a rescue. We got her 2 years ago from a shelter. So
I love that. I love it when I hear that dogs have basically human names. You know, does she have a middle name as well?
Oh, no, we never thought about that.
No, that's totally fine.
But she has a double last name. She has a double last name.
Oh, she has a double last name. Well, then we'll use one of those names for a middle name. That sounds great. Megan is such a precious name. I absolutely love it. You know, when I hear about the name Mission Rabies, I love it. I love the name because the purpose, the focus of the charity is all in the name. There's a mission against the spread of rabies. I hope people don't look at the name and interpret that it's a mission to spread rabies. I don't think anybody's thinking that. So, but what I've actually heard is just simply incredible. Your goals are, to put it lightly, extremely ambitious. And it borderlines on quixotic. The only thing that can't put it into the unrealistic category is that you actually achieve your goals. One of the goals that comes to mind, I heard, is organizing these massive vaccination endeavors. And it's super impressive. I've heard numbers as high as 50,000 dog vaccinations in 30 days as a goal of yours. Can you explain to me and our listeners what exactly is Mission Rabies and how you're able to achieve these incredible goals?
Yeah, I mean, Mission Rabies, as you wonderfully explained, it's in the name, and we see ourselves as a movement. We want everyone to join in the fight against rabies. So it's all about being extremely motivated, bringing in all the resources to get this vaccine that we have for such a long time to the dogs that need it. So what we do as Mission Rabies, we have our head office here in the UK, but we have offices in those countries that are in most need of help, where rabies is still rife, like India, like Malawi. And what we do, we train local people in those countries to take up the fight against rabies. And we run those mass vaccination drives with them. As you said, our initial drive that kicked off Mission Rabies was vaccinating 50,000 dogs across 14 cities in India. And everyone thought, oh my God, you are absolutely insane. You cannot pull this off. And you know what we did? We vaccinated 60,000 animals in the same amount of time.
You smashed that number. That's incredible.
Absolutely. So this is really what Mission Rabies is about. We aim high, but we exceed what we're aiming for. So every year, for instance, in one of our flagship projects in Goa in India, we vaccinate over 90,000 dogs every year. In Malawi, we vaccinate around 90,000 dogs every single year. So this is what it's all about. We want to vaccinate as many dogs as possible in a short amount of time to get rid of this disease. There's no need that this is still around.
I just want to be clear. You did say 90,000 dogs you're vaccinating.
Yeah, 90, yeah.
I don't even think people can conceive of 90,000 dogs all in one place, all in one country. Of course, that number is huge, but I think the most amount of dogs I've ever seen in one place has to be in the hundreds. You're talking 90,000. That's a really awesome goal and an awesome number. And, just in terms of how you were able to do it, what I think is incredible is you mentioned you train people and the people of the country to get involved in the vaccination program. There's a couple of really key characteristics that people talk about when being successful. They say, have a defined goal, have a timeline, and then have an objective criticism to help you study your progress to those goals. What do you think, besides training those people at the site, at the country, to help participate in the vaccination program, what do you think has been the most important technique that's helped you have such excellent success with Mission Rabies?
The team. That's the first thing that absolutely springs to mind. We have an incredible bunch of people who work here in the UK, who work in all the different countries that we work in, and they just make it happen. You know, they all go the extra mile to achieve those goals. And of course, I mean, we are a growing but evolving organization. We started off as in the beginning, small project of our sister charity, Worldwide Veterinary Services. And over time, we became so big that we became our own organization. And we constantly reinvent ourselves as well. So my colleague Andy, he started his PhD 2 years ago. I'm starting my PhD now. So we try to keep everyone involved and also further their scientific and academic careers to develop new methods that ultimately benefit the charity, those communities at risk, to just make our approach more efficient, more economic.
That's really, congratulations on starting your PhD. That's a huge accomplishment, and I know you're going to be really successful at it. I like the blend of the scientific aspect and being on the ground among the people where things are happening at ground level. Most people in this country on ground level, they don't ever think about contracting rabies because we, frankly, don't have a lot of contact with wildlife. But in other cases, in other countries even, most human cases of rabies are caused by dog bites. Why do you think this is? Is there, when you travel to these countries, is there a unique relationship between dogs and the people living there? Why is it that rabies is spread mainly through dog bites in a lot of these countries?
Yeah, well, the dogs serve as a reservoir for the virus. So and especially in those countries, there is a symbiotic relationship between people and the dogs as well. And it depends on the country, really, the situation of the dog population. So for one example, when you look into India, in India, you have a lot of those free roaming dogs. Those could be owned dogs, they could be properly stray dogs, but often they're also kind of like community dogs, where the entire neighborhood feeds the dogs. So everyone's involved with them. So you have a lot of dogs on the streets. So when you also look historically, if you look into Europe, I mean, we had rabies in Europe up until a couple years ago. So in Europe, we now eliminated rabies in wildlife as well. But before that, we had it in dogs as well. So just proper dog registration. So everything that we are now used to as veterinarians, when you go into practice, like your dog needs to have a tag, your dog needs to be registered, depending on the country. All of that oftentimes does not exist in the countries that still have dog rabies. So it's a combination of a lot of factors that actually lead to the fact that on a global scale, 99% of all human rabies cases are contracted by dog bites.
Wow, 99% of all human cases of rabies are contracted by dog bites. I think that's a really, really important detail to emphasize. You know, when I think about the idea of community dogs, the concept of community dogs, it really highlights just how fascinating the human-animal bond really is, because that's another component, that's another level of our relationship with animals that maybe people don't even necessarily think about. In the States, there is that concept of community cats, where there is a roaming kitty cat who just is fed by everybody in the neighborhood, and he just exists in that way. Occasionally, a good Samaritan may bring in a feral cat or a roaming dog into the hospital for medical treatment. And these animals have never quite, gotten acclimated to people. They haven't been handled. And I can't even describe what that's like, really, to try to give medical treatment to a dog or cat that's never been handled. You kind of have to use a mixture of cunning, a little intelligence, your own athleticism, so that you don't get harmed. I mean, set the scene for us one more time. How are you catching these dogs, these community dogs or dogs who are roaming, to vaccinate them? What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it really depends on the locale, really, on where you are, what the situation is on the ground. So if we talk, for instance, Malawi, most of the dogs there have owners. So the owners actually bring the dogs to us, and we can easily vaccinate them because the dogs are used to handling. When you go to India, where a majority of the dogs are actually free roaming dogs or properly stray dogs that are not used to being touched by a person, as you say, wrestling the dogs, what we do is we have teams with those huge butterfly nets, and they just go through the streets, and they just they catch the dogs from the streets.
Wow.
And they're absolutely skilled people. I mean, they go through a long training to be able to catch those dogs. And especially in those countries, that's the way to get them, because, we have to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time to reach our 70% vaccination coverage. And this is the way to go. And we combine that with other methods as well. As I said, we are constantly evolving. So we are currently looking into how to improve that as well. So it's an ever-evolving process.
This is an incredible scene, just seeing some of these dogs who, for good reason, they may be fearful, and they'll start, to run away, and you have these huge nets that you are able to secure them safely without harming them. And I think that's really incredible. Now, did you play a sport growing up, or?
Well, I played ping pong.
Oh, okay. That definitely doesn't. That may or may not help with the cause. So you use some of those old ping pong skills to catch them. That's pretty incredible. You mentioned something about India, which I thought was pretty incredible, and just the difference culturally between the two. You just used two countries as an example, but I got your larger point that it really depends on the country as to what type of relationship you're seeing among people and the dogs. In Malawi, you were mentioning most dogs have owners, and in India they tend to roam or be community dogs. When you're looking at certain laws and political practices, dogs are, from my understanding, protected by law in India. And in fact, this past May, the government passed sweeping regulations that ended indiscriminate breeding and provided funding for necessities like, food and water. In a country with 1 billion people and 30 million dogs, I can imagine that's a massive undertaking. Do you feel like there's any cultural or political influences that actually help with the goals of Mission Rabies, or not really?
Yeah, I mean, India is a perfect example. The government of Goa is the first state government in India that is committed to our cause as well. So we work closely with the government there to get on top of the problem in the state of Goa. So they're really committed to supporting the project and make this happen. And, this can then serve as an example to other states in India that this is actually possible. I mean, you said the numbers, 1 billion people, 30 million dogs. It sounds absolutely impossible, but we are trying our best to develop approaches that are economically viable as well, so that it's attractive to those state governments to take up the fight and set programs like ours up in other states as well, put resources in, because, in the long term, it sounds like a big investment in the short term, but in the long term, it actually saves money, because a recent study from about 2 or 3 years ago estimated that rabies globally costs the global economy about 8.6 billion euros every year.
Wow, 8.6 billion.
Yeah, so there is massive potential to save money by eliminating the disease at its source. That's the dogs. So by investing still a lot, in total terms, a large amount of money, but then in the long run, you would save so much. And that's one of our goals that we want, that we set ourselves to convince those governments to put those funds in as well, to eliminate that disease, to save the people, to improve the life of the dogs, and to finally get rid of the disease and save the economy hard buck.
Now, getting through or having a message that resonates with the government can be very difficult. So let me flip the question for a second. Those are certain examples where there are political or governmental mandates and regulations that are actually helping the cause of Mission Rabies. Have you run into any hurdles or been involved with any countries or political regulations that you feel have been challenging to Mission Rabies and helping you achieve your goals?
We are a charity. We are an international organization. So our very type of existence sometimes causes some issues with governments as well. Just you as an organization, you approach a government to take on a task that they should usually be responsible for. That makes the government look weak in the first place,
I see what you're saying.
So this can sometimes cause friction, but you have to make the governments your champions. You can actually convince those governments that by taking up the fight against rabies, if they're the forerunners, if they basically can put it on their flag and eliminate rabies with our help in their areas, they look good. It's actually them doing it because they got us in. They were not afraid to ask for help. So that is a great way to get in with governments as well. But just being an NGO, that sometimes, there are always black sheep out there. And that entire issue can cause sometimes problems as well, because governments might have bad experiences with NGOs in other fields. So they're hesitant to work with NGOs. But again, as the example in Goa, but also we work closely with the Department for Animal Health and Livestock Development in Malawi as well. So those are great examples where governments actually commit to the cause, and together we can actually do it. As I said in the beginning, we see ourselves as a movement. We want everyone around the globe to join that fight, and together we can make it happen.
That's really incredible. I love the fact that you do excellent work in Malawi. I was involved with a humanitarian and charitable organization to help give and donate desks to students in Malawi. So it's really incredible to hear that the work and good charity continues to happen in that country. You did mention the number 70, which I think is really interesting, 70% vaccination coverage. There's a concept of herd immunity when it comes to vaccination. And in this country, in the states, particularly in this state of California, that concept was really thrust into the zeitgeist, into the popular culture with a measles outbreak. We had individuals who had elected not to vaccinate their children against measles. When you talk about 70% vaccination coverage, what does the concept of herd immunity mean to Mission Rabies, and why that number 70 is such an important number to your organization?
Well, herd immunity is basically the backbone of all of our concepts. You will never be able to reach every single dog in an area. Just that's the nature of the work, So to explain that, we kind of have to look at the epidemiology a little bit of rabies. And in epidemiology, there's a figure called R0. That figure basically says how infectious a disease is. So how many other individuals can an infected individual transmit the disease to? For rabies, that value is at 1.2. That means, so for instance, an infected dog can transmit the disease on average to 1.2 other individuals. So that is very, very low, actually. Wow. So for measles, I don't know what the R0 for measles is, but it's, a lot higher than 1.2. So mathematically, you would need around 40% vaccination coverage. That means 40% of all the animals in the population have to be vaccinated in order to bring this R0 down below 1. That means an infected individual transmit the disease on average to less than one other individual. So over time, the disease dies out. Okay, 40%. I mentioned 70%. Why the 70%? Well, we are talking about a very dynamic population of dogs. It's not something static. So the population doesn't look the same next year as it does now.
Right.
So the concept behind the 70% is when you hit an area once a year, you want to be way above those 40% to ensure that throughout the year, before you come back again next year, you're always above those 40%. So, and mathematically it's been shown, and also in practice, it has been shown that those 70% are sufficient to, throughout the year, keep the vaccination coverage in an area above those 40%. And the population is very dynamic, especially in those countries where you have a lot of free roaming dogs. You know, a lot of the older dogs, they die through road traffic accidents, malnutrition, diseases. They're out on the street, and you have a lot of puppies coming in as well. So that all drives your vaccination coverage down. But by having 70%, you can always assure that you are above those 40%, and that will eventually kill the disease, as we've showed, for instance, in our project in Ranchi in northern India, where we didn't have a human rabies case since October 2016.
Wow, you haven't had a human rabies case since October of 2016, and when you initially started, I'm sure that number didn't seem achievable. I'm sure you didn't think that could ever, you imagined it could happen, but did you think that it would take more time?
We thought initially it would take more time. But it was good to see that we achieved that after 2.5 years, basically.
Yeah, that's so fast. Are you talking about these numbers and mathematically in terms of 40% and then coming back the following year? To get those numbers, to understand how that's happening mathematically, a lot of times you need to have population estimates. I can imagine when you're talking about community dogs or free roaming dogs, there's no idea as to how many dogs are in the country. How do you figure that out? And is that one of the greatest challenges that you face with Mission Rabies when you're looking for dog estimates?
Yeah, definitely. You definitely identified the biggest problem here. We do conduct population surveys before we go into a new area, and we check the abundance throughout our time we work in the area. However, it's a science in itself. So we constantly, with all the other aspects of our work, we constantly work on refining it. We work with the University of Edinburgh here in the UK as well, who help us crunching the numbers, because it's a ridiculously complex subject. And it's really, really hard to get, or I want to say it's impossible to get a 100% accurate population counts or estimates. So
we can't even do that with people. And
exactly,
how can we do that with roaming dogs? It's almost, like you said, it's almost impossible.
It is almost impossible. As I said, we do our utmost best to be as close to the truth as possible. But there are always so many unknowns. As I said, it's an open population. Dogs roam around, dogs die, dogs are born. So when you look at the population now, it could look completely different 3 months down the line even. So yeah, it's a very dynamic science as well that constantly needs changing and constantly needs refining and basically double checking. And it's unfortunately still, there's still a lot of guesswork involved as well.
There are people listening to you right now who say, I want to help take the guesswork out of it. I hear this vivid image that he's painting of going to other countries and making a huge difference. There's some people who are even thrilled with the idea of just being out there on the ground level, catching dogs and saving lives. And just listening to you, I'm inspired. So I guess the real question is how, when a motivated and inspired person is talking to you, what do you tell them about Mission Rabies as to how they can contribute? How can they make a difference like what you're doing? What, in your opinion, would be, an ideal volunteer?
Yeah, to all of those individuals, I just say, come out, join us. All of our projects are open for volunteers. So we do work in most of those countries throughout the year. But once a year, we do have what we call a mass vaccination drive, where we just look at a very specific area and just cover that entire area in a really short amount of time. So for those projects, we do accept volunteers, and you can come out, you can join us. It is really, really hard work, I won't lie. But we had volunteers ranging from 18 to 70 years of age.
70 years old.
Joining us out in the field. There's a role for everyone, and you don't have to have a veterinary background to join. You just have to be a very motivated individual who is also willing to walk up to 20 kilometers a day. So it is a lot of legwork that you have to put into. You have to be willing to get up at 4:30 in the morning and come back home to your accommodation at around 7 in the evening. It's long days. It's a lot of work, but it's so so rewarding as well, because you see the impact that you're having. Those communities love the teams when they come out, and they're so supportive. And yeah, it's, as I said, it's just really, really rewarding to be out in the field, knowing and feeling and seeing that you're making a difference to those communities, and most importantly, to those dogs.
A lot of people are thinking 20 kilometers a day, that's not a lot, it's just walking. I had the pleasure of doing many portions and the entire El Camino de Santiago in the north of Spain. And the first couple of days, I walked 34 kilometers. And I cannot tell you what I was experiencing the following day. It is a different feeling. And it was eye-opening, to say the least. I thought I was tough until I started walking 34 kilometers in a day. So I guess the real question is, it's fine to be inspired. It's fine to be motivated. And I love that concept. But let's be real for 1 second. What have you heard has been one of the biggest challenges with a volunteer? What should a prospective volunteer be prepared for? What have you heard people complain about?
Getting up at 4:30.
That's hard for me too.
No, but in all seriousness, I mean, as long as you're willing to go the extra mile and as long as you're open-minded, I mean, the areas we work in, they can sometimes be hard, especially when you're coming from Europe or the US. Malawi is the poorest country in the world at the moment. So wow. You do see the real struggles that people have to deal with in those countries. And you see a lot of animal suffering as well in those cases. So sometimes it can be really overwhelming. But once everyone realizes that what we're doing actually helps those communities, it helps those animals, that is really uplifting as well. And as I said, we try to be as sustainable as possible. We try to involve the communities as much as possible there to help them and to help with this problem.
You mentioned uplifting. When Fred Lohr puts his head on the bed and he finishes a long day of walking over 20 kilometers, he wakes up at 4:30 in the crack of dawn, and at the end of a long day, looks at the ceiling and you're happy. And you realize what you've been able to accomplish that day. What is the greatest source of your happiness? What are you most proud of as being a member of the charity?
It's just, as I said, it's just absolutely uplifting to know about the impact that we have, to just see the gratefulness of those communities and knowing that. And also, I mean, just looking at the hard facts that if we would not be working in those areas, there would probably be a child or an adult dying from that disease unnecessarily. And knowing that our teams, not just myself, just being part of this team, I don't see it as a personal achievement. It's really a massive team effort. So just being part of that team of amazing people who dedicate their lives basically to this cause, helping those communities, that's just the most uplifting fact, really.
Helping people, being a member of an excellent team, these are all things that I think a lot of people dream of. If it wasn't for the outstanding efforts of those on your team and so many volunteers around the world, how many people do you think, or what the numbers support, are dying of rabies every day or every year?
Well, current estimates are that about 59,000 people die from rabies every year globally. So 20,000 of those are estimated to die in India alone. So you can see what a tremendous impact the work in India can potentially have, or it does have at the moment, but there's still so much more potential to save lives as well throughout the entire subcontinent. The problem is, in a lot of those countries, a lot of those areas, it's really hard to get hard data to support those numbers, to collate those numbers. So the 59,000 who die from rabies every year is basically a gross underestimate, because that is just extrapolated from the data that we have at the moment. But because it's an underreported disease, it's just the tip of the iceberg, really. The sad story is no one knows how many people really, really die from rabies every day.
Oh. Goodness, 59,000 people, 59 lives that could be saved. You did mention something that I was very interested in. I am a big advocate, obviously, of the power of vaccines and how they can help save lives. But you had mentioned earlier, you said, it isn't just all about vaccines. There are other techniques, there are other efforts that we're actually instituting to help make the vaccination endeavors even more powerful. What are some of those other ideas, concepts, and techniques that Mission Rabies is employing to help the vaccination effort?
Well, one of the backbones really of our work is community education and sensitization.
I love that.
At all of our project sites, we do have education teams who really go out to the communities. They inform them, most importantly, how to avoid dog bites in the first place. So how do you actually behave around dogs? One of our biggest groups that we educate are primary school children in those areas, because, some areas, 60% of all human rabies victims, they are children. They're children under the age of 16, because, they play with the dogs, they care for the dogs throughout the day. Those are the ones that are most likely to get bitten. So we specifically target this group with an education program that we've shown actually works. We've done studies on that the kids remember what we're saying. And we have amazing case studies as well, where kids, especially, we have one recent story where a kid in India came across a rabid dog and remembered from our lesson that this could potentially be a rabid dog, ran back to the school, saw our poster there with an emergency hotline number for our team in the country. The team went out there, found the dog. It was a rabid dog. That dog already bit one or two people, and we could make sure that those people actually got the post-exposure treatment. And those lives were saved by this kid that was educated by our teams. So education is absolutely essential for all of our efforts. Without that education work, I don't think we would be able to achieve those numbers. And the education directly, as much as the vaccination as well, directly saves lives by teaching those kids and about teaching those community members about how to prevent dog bites, what to do once you've been bitten, like washing the wound with running water and soap for 15 minutes, which reduces the virus load tremendously already, getting that PEP treatment, but also be compassionate towards dogs, responsible dog ownership for people who do own dogs. So it's the full package of, rabies prevention and dog welfare that we give those kids, and they love it. I mean, it's great to go out there, be in those schools as well, and just see how the kids really, really soak in the information that we give them, because it's like an event for them as well when our teams show up in their yellow shirts.
Right.
It's always a big party. And, some schools, for instance, you've done work with schools in Malawi, and those classes there, they have class sizes of up to 300 children, in one classroom. So the energy that you're met with when you're going into one of those classrooms, it's absolutely breathtaking.
300 kids all there to greet you. What you're describing sounds very reminiscent to growing up in the States, where they would teach you all about stop, drop, and roll if you were ever to have your clothes be caught on fire. You remember these posters, you remember that education, you remember that training that they gave you growing up, or even something as simplistic as how to dial 911 in an emergency scenario. So these kids are getting such valuable and vital life lessons to help save lives. And I love that education aspect. So many people, as I mentioned earlier, are excited, motivated, inspired at the idea of making a difference all through the world. And the educational aspect is just one more component of that. I think for everybody listening, they want to know more how they can help. What's the best link or method that you would advise people or direct people to on how they can help?
Well, again, join us as a volunteer. You can sign up for one of our volunteer trips by visiting our website, missionrabies.com, and then /volunteer, or you can just go
missionrabies.com/volunteer.
Exactly. If you can't come out to a trip, you can also, every donation is really appreciated as well. Of course, there's so many ways you can help. You can just spread the word about what we're doing by downloading some of our information material, just share it around the community. Yeah, again, there's so many ways. Just, go on our homepage. It's all there.
Excellent. So missionrabies.com/volunteer. You can, if you want to help, you can spread the word about Mission Rabies. And then, of course, donations are always welcome for Mission Rabies in general. This has been just... Honestly, Fred, I could talk to you literally for weeks about this, but this has been an absolutely illuminating conversation. And the truth is, we haven't even really scratched the tip of the iceberg, because we could talk about individual countries, individual efforts, and just the day-to-day operations of what it means to be a volunteer. But if we could ever have the pleasure of having you back, I would really appreciate it. Would you ever consider coming back?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I could talk for days about this. So,
and we would listen for days. So we appreciate it. Fred, we want to thank you from the bottom of our heart, from all the podcast listeners, to discuss Mission Rabies and just spreading the good news about all of the exciting work that you're doing in all the countries. I look forward to talking with you again, and I hope you'll come back for part 2.
Alrighty, thank you very much. It was great to be there, and yeah, join us. Come out with us as well.
Oh, I'm already on board. I can't wait to travel. I'm just looking at my schedule right now. So thanks again, Fred. I really appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Alrighty, bye-bye.
Right. Bye-bye. Wow, folks, there you have it. The Global Operations Manager of Mission Rabies, Fred Lohr, veterinarian, just outstanding global citizen. It's just incredible to hear the work that's happening on the ground level, the educational efforts in different countries. Listen, we talk a lot about pets in this country and our human-animal bond here in the States, but it's so important that we realize that there's good work being done outside of this country on a global scale. We want our pets that are sitting right next to us in the living room to be healthy, but then it's also important to remember that keeping pets and animals healthy internationally all over the world can help save human lives. So just absolutely incredible. MissionRabies.com/volunteer. Spread the word, donate, let people know about this incredible charity and this incredible organization. I think all of us can learn a lot, and I'm certainly inspired. I hope you are too. Thanks again for joining this podcast. It's been absolutely incredible. We've got a lot more incredible guests lined up, ready for you for good episodes with riveting interviews. Thanks for joining us, and just remember, there's nothing stronger than the human-animal bond.
Let's Talk Pets, every week on demand, only on PetLifeRadio.com.